Welcome back again. So, in the first lecture, we have tried to understand the concept and the meaning of tribes, and particularly communities who are identified and designated as scheduled tribes. And we understand that the concept of tribe, particularly in the context of India, became popular with the coming of the British. And in many ways, it was the colonial state which have played a very important role in terms of identifying, in terms of studying communities whom today we know as scheduled tribes. Now, in India, it is a known fact that India in itself is a very diverse country, and the communities who are identified as scheduled tribes themselves, you must have already seen and heard as well that they are very diverse in terms of their culture, their language, lifestyle, their customs and their traditions. Now, scheduled tribe is definitely one of the very important category when it comes to tribes, but today we will also try to understand a different category, that is the denotified, nomadic and semi-nomadic tribes and the primitive vulnerable tribal groups in India. So, in the study of tribes, most of the time we are mostly talking about the communities who are identified as scheduled tribes. There is this another important category. Today we know it as denotified, nomadic and semi-nomadic tribes. So, these specific groups are being identified by the government on the basis of the specific histories and vulnerabilities associated with them. However, the category denotified, nomadic and semi-nomadic tribes, it has some kind of similar history. One has again one has to go back to the colonial period to really understand how this category began to be used, how it was used and why it was used. Now, the communities today who are identified as denotified, nomadic and semi-nomadic tribes, they were first identified as criminal tribes by the colonial state with the introduction and the passing of the Criminal Tribes Act of 1871. Now, under the Criminal Tribes Act, there were several communities who are given the tag criminal. So, they are considered to be hereditary criminals, hereditary criminals, and therefore, they are subjected to strict surveillance, confinement and gross discrimination. Now, why is it that the British feel the need? Why do they think that some communities needs to be identified as a criminal tribe? Now, I do not have to explain the fact that the term criminal is something which has which is negative, in a sense that it has a lot of negative connotations, right. Criminal is someone, the first thing that comes to your mind when anyone uses the term criminal is that they are doing something bad, they are committing a crime, they are indulged in certain activities which are harming or impacting someone or something negatively. Now, in India, we know that in many ways, particularly during colonial period, community life or social backgrounds in terms of caste and occupations are deeply interlinked. Now, in that kind of scenario, the Britishers think that there are certain communities in India who are habitually addicted to committing crimes. Therefore, they identify these communities as criminal tribes and made it an administrative category with the passing and or the introduction of the Criminal Tribes Act in 1871. Now, what are the provisions under the Act? What are some of the things that are very important to understand when it comes to the Criminal Tribes Act of 1871? The first is that communities or tribes who are declared as criminal, they were required to register with the police. Second is that due to the fact that they are involved in crime or indulge in activities that harm or affect the state or affect other communities, there was a lot of restrictions imposed on them in terms of their movement, in terms of their mobility. Now, even if they want to move out of their village, even if they want to move out of the areas where they live, they were required to acquire a permit. So, the third is that there was a forced settlement in designated areas, which will enable the the police or the state to maintain a close and strict surveillance. And the third is that children belonging to these communities, children coming from these families who are identified as criminal tribes, were often separated and placed in reformatory settlements, so that they do not practice or continue with what their parents or their grandparents are practicing. Now, the Criminal Tribes Act of 1911 is a kind of reincarnation of the original 1871 Act. Now, what does this Criminal Tribes Act of 1991 does is that more tribes were added to the list, and more or severe restrictions and surveillance were being imposed so that these communities are being closely monitored and surveilled, and they do not indulge in criminal activities. Secondly, the members of the notified tribes had to register themselves with local authorities. Now, all the families, all the communities belonging to the group who are identified as such have to register themselves with the police or with any local authorities. They have to regularly go and do check-ins, which was made mandatory. Their mobility in terms of moving here or migrating or traveling was severely restricted. There were forced settlements, forcibly settled in specific areas and under constant watch. The traditional lifestyle of the people, particularly in terms of making a living, was significantly affected. So, these colonial legislations was introduced specifically to communities whom the colonial state thinks that they are habitual offenders. They are communities who survive and live on stealing, theft, or indulging in burglary or any other activities which they consider were harming individuals or against the economic interests of the colonial state. Now, the Act remained in force until 1952, that is in post-independent India. So, this law or this Act was repealed after independence. Now, to give a little a bit of context why these communities are being identified as criminal tribes, is that the colonial state like I said have these stereotypical assumptions about any communities, not only the criminal tribes, but any communities that they were colonizing, that they colonized, for instance. Now, in India also we know that the British thinks that they are racially superior, and it is their superiority that made them rule over India, right? And they treat us India as a second class citizen. They were subjects, we are subjects, we are not even citizens, we are subjects of the colonial state. Now, so the prejudice is that or the belief is that there is this genetic transmission of criminal tendencies, or the tendency that there are some communities who are addicted to committing a crime. So, these communities primarily are mostly semi-nomadic or nomadic communities, and these are communities who have these cultural systems of migrating from one place to the other because of their occupation, because of their way of life. So, nomadic groups were practicing trade by traveling from village to village. Traditionally, de-notified and nomadic and semi-nomadic communities practice a range of occupations. For instance, pastoralists and hunter-gatherers, mainly shepherds, cowherds and hunters of small game, goods and service nomads such as blacksmith, stone worker, weapon markets, salt traders. They are also entertainers, dancers, acrobats, snake charmers, monkey trainers. They are also religious performers, ascetics, devotional singers, minstrels and astrologers. Now, like the category scheduled tribe that we have discussed in the first lecture, now in this case also communities were identified as criminal tribes or de-notified or de-notified tribes in the context of India today. They are also very diverse. It is not that they belong to one set of people or one set of community. They belong to a diverse set of people who have a diverse set of cultural practices, who practices different kinds of economic activities to maintain their living. Now, one of the reasons why the British colonial state was very uncomfortable with this community is their way of life, because They consider that restlessness and mobility as a sign of criminality in a society wherein sedentary living was associated with respectability. Now, this idea, all of us today, we follow a sedentary lifestyle in a sense that we have a settled life. All of us think that most of us have homes, for instance, that we go back to after work, right? Most of us have fixed occupations. It's not it. I am a teacher, for instance. That is what I do every day. I have a home. That is where I go back every day. So my life, the nature of the occupation that I do is something which is closely associated with a very, very sedentary lifestyle. But in the context of the criminal tribes, what is important is that there is a lot of mobility. And this mobility in a sense that they keep on migrating from one place to the other. Now, if they are a community of pastoralists, they may move from one region to the other region. If there is winter, then they will go to an area where there is summer. They have the possibility of maintaining their livelihood, right? They have the grazing fields for their gods, for instance. So therefore, mobility, movement, was something which was intrinsic or integral to the way of life of this community. But then that was seen as a sign of criminality by the colonial state. So what the Criminal Tribes Act tried to do was that they tried to create settlements, fixed settlements, so that these communities no longer move from one place to the other, to reform and cure the criminal propensities, the tendency to do or indulge in criminal activities. Now, we have a lot of, we have some communities who are quite semi-nomadic. Even in Uttarakhand, we have communities who are quite semi-nomadic in Jammu and Kashmir as well, who migrated seasonally at times, who migrated according to the changing weather, for instance, right. So for them their way of life is defined by this continual movement from one place to the other. Now, in the post independent India, there was this All India Criminal Tribes Inquiry Committee, which was established in the year 1949, and it was from this that the criminal tribes came to be known as the de-notified tribes, and this happened after the removal of the Criminal Tribes Act from the Constitution of India. Now, there is another category that one has to know, which is the particularly vulnerable tribal groups. Now, in the case of India, many of the tribal communities in India have done quite well in terms of socio-economic and political development, but generally tribal communities in India are the one who have lag behind when it comes to various indicators of development. And this does not spare any region or state. For instance, in Orissa, there are significant number of poor people in the state belongs to the tribal communities, and likewise even in states like Madhya Pradesh, and other states in India. Or if you look at the national level as well, you will see that tribes, scheduled tribe communities constitute one of the largest number of poor people in India. So, but beyond the scheduled tribes, there are these specific communities who are known as PVTGs, particularly vulnerable tribal groups, whose socioeconomic conditions are far worse than the communities who belong to the scheduled tribes. Now, mostly tribal communities live in forest and hilly terrains, maintaining distinct socio-cultural and economic practices. More or less, they have a subsistent or a self-sufficient economies based on shifting cultivation, hunting, gathering, and handicrafts. They had autonomous governance structures and little interaction with mainstream agrarian societies. Now, who are these PVTGs? PVTGs are tribal groups who are considered as highly vulnerable based on the following criteria. Now, this is one way of identifying who are PVTGs in India. One is the forest, but they are mostly forest dependent livelihoods, in a sense that they rely on forest produces to maintain their living, their everyday needs. Pre-agricultural level of existence, many of them therefore live on the forest resources. Stagnant or declining population, you will see that many of the PVTGs there is a fear of extinction, in a sense that their numbers are significantly low, very, very low literacy rates. Now, in India, post independence, India as a country has achieved phenomenal success when it comes to literacy, right. States like Tripura, states like Kerala, or even Tamil Nadu, many states in the northeast, despite of the fact that they are predominantly inhabited by tribal communities, the literacy rate of these states are exceptionally very, very well and comparable to many of the developed countries in the world. But then if you look at the literacy rate of these PVTG communities, then you will see that their literacy rate is far below the national average. More or less they follow the subsistence based economy. Now, in 1975, the government of India has identified 52 tribal groups as primitive tribal groups based on their extreme socio-economic vulnerability. Later on, it was changed, the term primitive tribal groups was changed to particularly vulnerable tribal groups, with 75 communities or groups who are now recognized across 18 states with a population of 27,68,322 as per the 2011 census. Now, like scheduled tribes, the PVTGs communities, they are also quite spread out. They are in 18 states of India, and within them also, again, it is important to remind ourselves that there is significant variations in terms of their social life, in terms of their cultural habits, cultural norms, their values, their traditions, their political systems, as well as their socio-economic level of development. However, the majority of PVTG lives in the 6 states, namely Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Odisha, Andhra Pradesh and Tamil Nadu. Now, the state of Odisha has the highest number of PVTGs for any state in India. Much of the issues faced by the communities are: one, that is extreme poverty and malnutrition; second is the lack of education and healthcare; third is loss of traditional livelihoods due to deforestation and land displacement; fourth is social discrimination and cultural erosion. Now, what make them particularly vulnerable, all of these factors contributes to their vulnerability. Now, so like I said, their literacy level is significantly lower than the national average. Their life expectancy is also relatively shorter than the national average, and due to the increasing modernization and urbanization and other associated changes that has happened in the last 70 or more than 70 years, these communities are also facing a lot of threats to their traditional livelihoods, particularly due to deforestation and land displacement. And socially as well, they face a lot of discrimination because of their identities, because of their cultures, because of their belonging as well. Now, if these are some of the communities who are identified as PVTGs across states, say in Andhra, in Bihar, in Gujarat, in Karnataka, in Kerala, in Madhya Pradesh, including Chhattisgarh, Maharashtra, in Manipur, in Odisha, Rajasthan, Tamil Nadu, Tripura, Uttar Pradesh, including Uttarakhand, West Bengal, Andaman and Nicobar Islands. Now, you can see that there are significant, their numbers are quite significant in the sense that they are quite spread out as well. So, these communities more or less have similar challenges in terms of their vulnerability, and this vulnerability encompasses their social, their cultural, their development, their economic, as well as in the realm of policy and politics as well. So, with this I am going to conclude my second lecture. So, what I tried to do in this lecture is to briefly outline the issue of scheduled tribes in India, and particularly in this lecture I focus on the denotified and the criminal tribes who were known as the criminal tribes of India, and also the particularly vulnerable tribal groups in India. Now, it is important again to understand that even among the tribal communities there are significant variations, and these variations again I wanted to stress it because many of the tribal communities have fared economically well in today's context, particularly in Northeast India. You will see that there are states which have are predominantly tribal, and in these states tribal communities have also done quite well in terms of education, in terms of healthcare, in terms of livelihood. They have occupied important positions not only in the state but at the national level as well. They have expanded or diversified in terms of their occupations as well. Many of the tribal communities today have moved away from agriculture. They have moved into the service sector. They have migrated not only within different metropolitan centers of India, but they have migrated globally as well. They are an important workforce when it comes to the service sector as well. But then there are other communities within these tribal communities who are known as the particularly vulnerable tribal groups, and these groups are very very vulnerable in terms of the demography, in terms of their culture, in terms of their economic, in terms of their everyday lifestyle. Now it is also very easy to make out them by just trying to understand their socioeconomic life world, in a sense that they are again quite distinct from many of the communities who are identified as scheduled tribes. So in a nutshell, what I wanted to outline today is the history in which communities in India are identified as tribes, criminal tribes, and later on denotified, notified, and semi-nomadic tribes, and particularly vulnerable tribal groups. One has to go back to the history in terms of really trying to understand how these terms, how these categories were introduced by the colonial state, and how it has been adopted and internalized by the communities who are identified as such. Now even with primitive tribal groups, or particularly vulnerable tribal groups, it is important to understand that many of these communities in some states they are identified as PVTGs or denotified tribes, but in some states they are also identified as scheduled caste or under different categories. So like the anomalies that we talk about in the first lecture, there are also anomalies even within the denotified tribes as well. Some communities may be identified as denotified tribes in Maharashtra, but they may not be in Madhya Pradesh or in Karnataka. Some communities may be identified as denotified tribes in Uttarakhand, but not in Jammu and Kashmir, so on and so forth. So administratively, it is very convenient to identify and club different people, different communities under one category, but at the same time, while this identification is very helpful, but it has its own set of problems in terms of the lack of uniformity and coherence, and therefore we continue to face the challenges of really defining and outlining how to categorize communities, how to categorize people, and this problem continue to persist in the context of the way in which we try to identify and recognize communities belonging to scheduled tribes, particularly vulnerable tribal groups. Thank you so much.